Hello, Connecticut, and welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. The title basically says it all. I'm Nancy Barrow, and I will be delving into this new state program and how it can help you and your family. This podcast will give you information you should know about Connecticut paid leave and maybe just a little bit more. Connecticut paid leave brings peace of mind to your home, family, and workplace. Welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. October is Safe Sleep and SIDS Awareness Month, and according to the National Institute for Health, SIDS is known as sudden infant death syndrome, and it's the leading cause of death among babies aged between 1 month and 1 year, and the vast majority of deaths take place before the baby reaches 6 months of age. Every year, there are about 3,400 cases of sudden, unexpected infant deaths, known as SUID, in the United States. Joining me on this topic is Alison Jacobson. She's the CEO of First Candle, which is a national nonprofit addressing sudden, unexpected infant death. They do this through community partnerships and educating families on life-saving safe sleep practices, while also providing bereavement support services to families who have tragically experienced the death of their baby from SUID or stillbirth. Alison is a lost mom herself, and her son Connor died in 1997. She's passionate about helping save babies' lives while supporting grieving families. Welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast, Alison. So glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm so sorry about your son Connor. What a terrible loss for anyone to handle. You know, I'm not a mom, but I can just, I'm an auntie, and so I can't imagine how hard that is on a whole family.
It's not even just the whole family. It's an entire community. You don't realize how many people are impacted, even the first responders, the pediatricians, the neighbors, your church, your community, everybody is impacted. And I can say that while the pain never goes away, it does change. And one of the things that I love about First Candle is we provide peer support volunteers who have gone through it, who are in a similar situation. And what I offer, and our bereavement support director who lost her son Christmas Eve morning 40 years ago, we offer hope. We offer the hope that life does go on.
Yeah. What kind of help was offered to you back in 1997? And where did you go to find help?
Well, right. Facebook didn't exist. The internet existed. And so I immediately went on, because when Connor died, we were down at Stanford Hospital, and my pediatrician said, we can't say it for sure, but we're pretty sure it's SIDS. And so I went online and started reading everything I could. And at that point, sudden infant death syndrome was unpreventable and unpredictable. And so that was a great challenge, and I didn't know where to turn. And I found what was First Candle at that time, the SIDS Alliance. And they had people to support me. They had conferences that I could go to and really be around other SIDS parents, because, while every loss is just tragic, there's a difference between an infant loss and a teen loss or a partner loss. And really finding those people who know exactly what you're going through is just so important.
Yeah, I think, that loneliness and isolation part of it, right? So that is really tough when you're grieving.
Yeah. And that's why at First Candle, we have Facebook support groups, one for infant loss, one for stillbirth, one for miscarriage. And that's all on our website, which is firstcandle.org. We also have a warm line for people to speak with. And as I said, we have peer support volunteers who are in the similar age range or even geography of you.
Well, why don't we talk about First Candle? How did First Candle come about?
So First Candle's been around for 40 years. And as I said, it used to be the SIDS Alliance, and we had partners all around the country. And I took over. I was on the board of directors when Connor died. I stayed for 5 years and then went on to have my other children, and came back in 2016 as the CEO. And one of the things, I was always in PR and marketing. And so I was in a unique position because most nonprofits have somebody running them who's been in it forever. and who is a nonprofit person. I came from the for-profit world, and I came from the messaging world. And why that's important is, as you said, there are about 3,400 cases of sleep-related infant death every year. That number has not changed in 2 decades.
Wow.
And so you have to start thinking about, well, what's behind that? And if we're saying the same message and nothing's happened, we need to look at the message itself and the messenger. And one of the challenges, while there's a tremendous racial disparity, 3 Black babies die to every one every year, and that's the national average. In some places, it's 4 babies. In Atlanta, Georgia, 4 babies are dying every week.
I read that. What is that about?
Well, unfortunately, it's racial disparity. It's lack of access to care because majority of the cases are on Medicaid, but it's also just logistics, right? It's very hard to get to the pediatrician if you can't get the time off of work, if you have transportation issues, if you have other children to care for. And so on the education side of what we do is we go directly into the community. We identify community partners who are known, liked, and trusted, and we train them along with doulas, dads, and grandparents to give the safe sleep education to families in the community where they're naturally gathering, whether it's grocery stores or daycare centers or community centers. So we're not creating another barrier for them to get into the pediatrician's office. But I can tell you, listen, the safe sleep guidelines say babies should not be in the same bed with you. They should be near you. And that's wonderful. But at First Candle, we're not just evidence-based, we're reality-based. And we all know that parents are exhausted.
Right?
Yeah. And they need to go to work the next day. So what are they doing? They're doing anything they can to get that baby to sleep. And oftentimes that means coming into bed with them. And so we talk about safer ways because 71% of babies are in an adult bed at some point in the evening.
71%?
71%, wow. Whether that's starting out in bed or that's when the baby wakes up to feed at 2 a.m. and it's just easier to keep baby in bed. So we need to talk about ways to do it where it's safer. No heavy comforters, no animals, nobody else in the bed, a very firm mattress. And so there are ways to make it safer.
And when you're doing your education outreach, which is vitally important for getting the messages to dads and grandparents, you're right. Like they might be the daycare for this child, and they need to know the correct way to let the baby sleep. So I think that's amazing. And I didn't even think of that aspect of it, that you really do need to educate everybody in the family who's having contact with the baby. But let's go back to the racial disparities. A lot of OBGYN clinics and hospitals, and they're closing down. Yes. And, that's even in rural areas and urban areas. And how do you tackle that when some of these birthing centers are closing down because of funding?
Right. And, going back to Atlanta, in half the counties in Georgia, there are no longer OBs. So a young lady might have to travel for hours just to get to a doctor's appointment. And that's why our Let's Talk community chats are so important. Doulas aren't the complete answer, but they are part of the solution along with midwives. And so with our Let's Talk community chats, we're able to go into those rural areas, identify a church or a social service agency or a doula collective who does have the reach into that community where we can provide the information. So a mom can come and talk to the doula or the lactation consultant or the midwife while a dad is talking to a dad, a grandparent is talking to a grandparent. But, I have to tell you, I feel like we are very fortunate to be here in Connecticut where we do still have the right to health care and female reproductive rights, where in many cases that's no longer the case. And it is a crisis.
Tell me some safe sleeping habits or strategies that new or soon-to-be parents really should know, because there's myths like swaddling, or is that good or bad?
Yes.
What should be happening and what should they know?
Well, and that's why we talk a lot about the whys behind the safe sleep guidelines, because unfortunately, doctors will say, do this, don't do this, but they won't explain why. And
Mm-mm.
parents want to know. So I think the most important thing still is to have your baby on their back to sleep, not side, nowhere, for every sleep, nap and nighttime, and have nothing else in that baby's area. No blanket, no pillow. No, I know as a parent, you look at that sleep space and say, oh, it looks so barren. It's just not comfortable. But that is the safest place for your baby to sleep. The other myth that we always have to counter is families think sometimes it's safer to have the baby on their stomach because they seem more comfortable, or if they spit up. The reality is, if a baby is spitting up, if they're on their back, they will turn their head from side to side to clean, to get rid of what's in their mouth. Whereas if they're on their stomach, it's going to go right back down the wrong way. So a firm, flat surface. And what a firm surface means is if you push your hand down on that, if it leaves an indentation, it's not firm enough. So firm, flat, on their back with nothing in that environment.
No
blanket,
baby bumpers, no anything.
no bumpers, nothing in that area,
Mm.
and you don't want to have extra layer of clothing. A lot of people think of bundling that baby up. The rule of thumb is if you're comfortable, just one extra layer on that baby. And it's better to layer with a wearable sleep sack or something like that for the baby.
How has your lived experience and the loss of Connor helped you in the work that you're doing?
Well, I'll tell you, as I said, I was in PR all my life. And, while losing Connor was the most absolute tragic thing I could have ever gone through, while I would always want Connor back in my life, the fact that, look, I was always in PR and I thought that's what I would always do. But that little angel pushed me along the path of what I was truly meant to do. And I didn't even know that at the time. But for me, supporting young moms, educating families, I always say if I could help save one baby's life, I would have done something in honor of my son. And so, yes, this is my career, but this is my passion. The fact that 3,400 babies are still dying every year and we can prevent a vast majority of them is just unconscionable. We have the highest infant mortality rate in the world in first world countries. That is unacceptable.
And it's because education isn't reaching these people, right? So how do you do that? Where do you fill that gap in?
Well, let me say it's education, but it's also, unfortunately, our culture. In other cultures, mom and dad aren't going back to work for 6 months.
You're
They
right.
have that time to be with baby, to bond with baby, to not be exhausted because they have to go to work the next day. And so that's one of the problems we have in this country is we are not allowing that time for breastfeeding and for safe sleep. And in terms of the education, October is Safe Sleep Awareness Month. There's a lot of information on our site and our social media, firstcandle.org, where you can learn that information. But, it's not just who else is watching the baby. We know there's a lot of single dads out there. There are a lot of, because of maternal mortality, dads raising their baby on their own. So we need to make sure that we're also getting the information to dads.
Yeah, that's vital because I didn't even think about that. Why? And I guess this is where Connecticut paid leave comes in, right? Because Connecticut paid leave gives bonding leave up to 12 weeks for the parents, both mom and dad. If they're working and they're paying into this program, they should take advantage of the fact that they can take this time for bonding with their baby. And they can even, maybe she takes the first 3 months, he takes the next 3 months. So then you have 6 months with that child, right? And so I do think that Connecticut paid leave can fill in the gaps there. And especially when you have exhausted parents, you're right. They're going to fall asleep with the baby on them. So how important are programs like this to the people that you serve and help?
Well, it's really interesting. I just came back from a conference in Atlanta and they were talking about paid leave and they had a focus group with dads who said it is critical for them because they want that time bonding with their baby. They feel like mom has more time bonding and they want that. And they've shown that it is so important, even as the child gets older, that that initial bonding time was in place. And so, again, the same thing with breastfeeding. Breastfeeding reduces the risk of SIDS by 50%. Now, I know not everybody can breastfeed, not everybody chooses to, but if they do, we see such a decline when mom goes back to work because many people don't know it's the law to have a place for mom to breastfeed. But even if it does, it causes it. So we see that drop off in breastfeeding when mom goes back to work. And we know that breast milk and breastfeeding is such a critical health component for mom and baby.
Yeah. And they do say when the latching is there, there's a huge bond that happens if you can, and if you can and you pump, that is as significant as well.
Yes.
So what would you tell people? When there's a loss that is so big like that, people don't know what to say. Like family members, friends, you don't know what to say to that parent or parents who have lost a child this way. What is some advice you can give people about how they should talk to them? What should they say? How can they help them? What should they say to them in this kind of terrible loss?
Well, again, there is a problem in this country where we don't understand grief. And I'm sure you've heard about the stages of grief, but the stages of grief were never meant to be linear. They're circular. So there are days when you're denying it. Then there's days when you're angry. And then there's days when you're bargaining. And then you go back to denying it. And so I think, unfortunately, there is this thought in our country where it's like, well, it's been a year. You should be over it by now. Why are you still grieving? And it's a process. It's a process that really goes on for so long. The most important thing I will tell anybody who has a friend or a family member who's experienced a loss, whether it's miscarriage, stillbirth, or an infant, families want to talk about their baby. Ask them their baby's name. Ask them to talk about it, because the last thing we want to do is think that people have forgotten about our baby. Our baby stays with us forever, and we never want to think our baby's forgotten. So too often, people are afraid to talk about it for fear of upsetting the person. Trust me, you can't upset us more than we already are. And the fact that somebody is caring enough to ask about our child means so much to us. And the platitudes of it was God's will, all of that, keep that aside. Just listen. Just listen. Give that family member the opportunity to talk. And it's okay to cry. It's okay to hug. It's okay to say, hey, I'm just coming by to sit with you today. It's those little things that make such a difference.
Yeah. And I think mental health, right? So if you are depressed or you're full of anxiety, those are serious health conditions, according to Connecticut Paid Leave, and they do give up to 12 weeks of income replacement. So you can take some time to get treatment. And it's hard to ask for help, but, there are therapists who can really help. Did you try to do that in your grief?
So I went to one group, and while it was a wonderful group, it was for parents who'd lost their child. And as I said, it's a different loss when it's a 16-year-old versus an infant. So for me, I connect, and that's why I reached out to First Can, because it was specifically for SIDS and stillbirth. And I felt like I was around my community. And I think that's so important to be able to talk about something. We always say it's the club that no one wants to belong to, but once you're part of the club, we're all there for you. And so, as I said, I really encourage people to check out firstcandle.org for those bereavement support services. Additionally, we have a gentleman on our board. He lost his baby back in 2018. And with two other dads, he started a podcast 2 years ago, Guys and Grief. It is the only podcast in North America for men dealing with infant loss. And it's just a fabulous resource, because the grief process for for men looks very different than women.
What is it? So tell me what the differences are. Can you tell me a few differences for dads who might be listening?
Yeah, for women, usually that grief is looking back and what's missing. For dads, it's what would have been, looking forward, missing all the things that would have been. We often have dads call our grief line and they're whispering outside because they don't want their partner to know they called, because they feel like they need to be stronger. They feel like they can't show it. And men tend to express their grief more physically. They'll play basketball, they'll run, they'll do things like that. They don't talk through their feelings. They act through their feelings. And that's very isolating for women who are trying to have those conversations. The other thing is men want to fix it. You can't fix grief.
No.
You can only go through grief. And so understanding that your partner is grieving different than you is really important, to give each other that safe space to grieve in the same way, or to grieve in their own way.
That's interesting that they started the podcast.
Yeah.
And you don't really think of the differences in how each parent might be grieving. And to know that is empowering in a way.
Yeah. And it's also racially. Black women historically aren't allowed to grieve. First of all, for so many Black women, they're just worried about their children not dying of gunshots. They're so busy caring for the entire family. They're not allowed to grieve. They don't have the time to grieve. And there is the impression of the strong Black woman who doesn't grieve. And so whenever we're speaking in a group with Black women, we always ask them to say their baby's name, and we hold space for them to really be able to grieve. It's not easy.
It's not easy. And there's not, a lot of access to mental health care there either. And so that's just another hurdle for them to get through. So they, it's important for them to be able to be taken care of.
Yeah.
What are some of the resources available, and who can parents get in touch with to find out more?
So to find out more, as I said, you can go to firstcandle.org. We have a tab for bereavement support. We have a tab for community outreach that talks about all our programs in the community and how you can get involved. There is certainly the donate button, because we are a nonprofit and all of our focus is on supporting the community with products they need as well. Swaddles, pacifiers, all of that. So that is the best way to get involved. You can find us on Instagram, First Candle, and also on Facebook.
It's SIDS Awareness and Safe Sleeping Month. And what would you like people to take away from this podcast?
I think two things. From the education side of safe sleep awareness, it is never too soon to start talking and getting educated about safe sleep. Babysitters need to understand about this. Grandparents need to understand about this. In high schools, the first person sometimes that knows somebody is pregnant is that school nurse. And so it's critical that everybody understand about the safe sleep guidelines and safe sleep practices. But also October 15th is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Remembrance Day. And all around the world, candles are lit on October 15th to remember all our angels who are gone too soon. And so if you know somebody who has experienced a stillbirth, a miscarriage, or an infant loss, just say to them that day, hey, I'm thinking of you, because it really means so much to us to know that other people are thinking about our babies as well.
Any last thoughts about how Connecticut paid leave can help? Even if you're a caregiver, like we have caregiver leave, right? So, and our caregiver leave has a broader definition of family. So it doesn't have to be blood related. It can be by affinity, which could be a neighbor, your best friend, an aunt that might be taking care of a parent who has had this terrible loss, especially a single mom or a single dad.
Yeah. It's so important to take the time available to you when you have a new baby, because you've got to take care of yourself and your partner. We're all exhausted. Take that time for yourself, because you need it. You need it for yourself and you need it for your baby. And if you have experienced that loss, again, take that time. Grief doesn't go away. It does get better, I promise you, and I'm here for hope. But take that time, because you may think you're okay, but it'll come right back at you when you least expect it.
And what would you like us to know about Connor?
Oh my gosh, my perfect little baby. Connor made me who I am today. Connor impacted more people around this world than I ever knew he would. And every day when I talk to another parent who's lost a baby, I say a little prayer to Connor saying, please give me the right words. And whenever I'm educating families, I can see my little angel over me saying, right on, Mom.
Oh, that's so sweet. Any last thoughts you would like to share with our audience?
Please, please, please understand the safest thing you can do is have a separate space for your baby to sleep in your room. Keep all blankets, pillows, stuffed animals away from your baby, because they can kill your baby.
I want to thank my guest, Alison Jacobson, the CEO of First Candle, which is a national nonprofit addressing sudden, unexpected infant death. Thank you so much for being on the Paid Leave podcast. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me and what you're doing.
For information about First Candle, please go to firstcandle.org. And for information or to apply for benefits, please go to ctpaidleave.org. This has been another edition of the Paid Leave podcast. Please like and subscribe so you'll be notified about new podcasts that become available. Connecticut Paid Leave is a public act with a personal purpose. I'm Nancy Barrow, and thanks for listening.